Human Nutrition Case Study in Nutrition oral presentation conducted by Truitt Francis. Hello and welcome to today's discussion where I'll be talking about food. Yes, food, the good, the bad and the ugly side of food. Do we really know and understand the nutritional health benefits of eating the recommended daily requirements of the 5 food groups? What are the short and long-term health implications of consuming good foods compared to consuming discretionary foods? Do we need to change our current eating patterns and why? During this presentation, I'll report on a 24-hour and 3-day food recall by a family member and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of both food recalls. I will highlight any concerns or issues that arose during this assessment, compare the data to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, and make or recommend any changes to the dietary intake for the subject in regard to their age, health, and lifestyle. Lastly, I'll provide a summary of the key points discussed and state this as a conclusion. Food is essential for humans to exist, and by the way, it tastes great. Without food, we would ultimately lose our health and eventually die a slow and painful death. McDonald, 2015. Let me begin with the 24-hour and 3-day food recall, which I conducted on a family member. Her name is Tanya. She's a 39-year-old Caucasian female. She is 5 foot 2 inches tall with a body weight of approximately 104 kilograms. And a waist circumference of approximately 138 centimetres, 54 inches. She is employed by Education Queensland as a teacher and works full-time from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. 5 days a week. Her work is mostly sedentary to moderate with little to no strenuous leisure activity, and she has 2 children. One is 3-year-old and one is 6 months old. There is a family history of cardiovascular disease as well as diabetes type 1 and 2 in her family. So now let me discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the 24-hour and 3-day food recalls for the subject. Some of the advantages of the 24-hour recall is that the survey information provided requires only short-term memory, and the process usually takes approximately 20 minutes to complete. This eases any pressure on the subject to finish the assessment, and so this process is somewhat relatively easy. Thompson and Subar, 2020. Some of the disadvantages of the 24-hour food recall is that the lack of information provided for a single day by the subject to fully describe their diet or their typical diet. The subject may change what they consumed during this period, and so this recording bias is seen as a disadvantage. Thompson and Subar, 2020. Successful recall depends on the memory, participation, and communication of the subject. Additionally, this recall cannot account for any day-to-day variations which may occur, and so it should be used with other methods of assessments. Corello, 2020. 3-day food recalls. Some of the advantages there is making the subject aware of their dietary intake, causing them to possibly change their behaviour, attitudes and eating patterns for the better. Also, if the dietary assessment is completed as the foods are eaten, it has a process or the potential to provide high quality feedback data. Thompson and Subar, 2020. Disadvantages of the 3-day food recalls are very similar to the 24-hour food recalls as well. And additionally, if the subject is recording their daily food intake, they may change their dietary pattern of food because of participating in the study for the short-term health benefits. Furthermore, there is a significantly higher burden placed on the subject to be motivated and literate when completing the assessments as well. Thompson and Subar, 2020. So now let me discuss some of the concerns or issues that arose for both the 24-hour food recall and the 3-day food recall for the subject. So some of the inaccuracies there on the food recall was that after checking what the subject had eaten, I found that the food quantities were not recorded accurately enough. So then I asked the participant if they could recall the approximate amount of food that they consumed for that period. These can be seen on the reports as adjustments I've made in the comments section. The ability for the subject to recall the approximate weight of food can be viewed as an error, particularly when the size of the food was not accurately measured before consumption. So for this purpose, I used an electronic weigh scale machine to record the approximate weight of the food the participant indicated she had eaten, therefore amending the weight to close as reasonably possible. There are no other practical issues encountered for this recall, as it was conducted on a public holiday and during normal family life with 2 small children. A 3-day food recall experienced the same issue as a 24-hour food recall in regard to inaccurate food measurements, which I amended by weighing the food and making the additional notes. Another issue encountered was the data of the food intake was not recorded for the 3 days until after the subject had eaten, and it was done late at night. So she had only done all of the assessment data recording for the 3 days at the end of the 3 days. Again, trying to recall what she had eaten during that time period, there may have been errors in the consumption of the food there. Another issue that arose was that it was done late at night, and as family commitments to the children had taken precedence over the assessment. So there would be errors in there according to what was eaten by the subject, as she was tired and had to try and recall to the best of her knowledge what she had consumed for that day. Also, another verbal recount was conducted in order to try and record the data to the best of her knowledge. Now let's look at the comparisons of the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating to the subject's 24-hour food recall. So on the left here we have the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating recommendations, or the food intake for a 39-year-old woman who is breastfeeding. It gives the approximate weight sizes and also the daily serves that you should be having per day as a breastfeeding 39-year-old woman. On the left here I have the subjects for 24-hour food recall, and comparing that to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating recommendations, I've noted in there in the recommended daily serves that she is above the recommended daily intake for her coffee. Fruit she's below, bread and cereals below the recommended daily intake. She's above on her meat intake, above the recommended daily intake. Going to the vegetables, she's below as well. And comparing that data from both the Guide to Healthy Eating and to her data for the 24-hour food recall, it shows quite clearly that she is not consuming the recommended or the daily requirements for a breastfeeding 39-year-old woman. And then looking now at the data that she had consumed during the 3-day food recall, again, she has an overconsumption of the discretionary coffee there, having more than the recommended daily intake. And going through all of my data there, she is again consuming well below the Australian dietary recommendations of fruit, breads and cereals. Meat intake is still quite high though, and her dairy intake is low. So looking at both the 24-hour and 3-day food recalls of the subject for a breastfeeding 39-year-old woman, Tanya is not consuming the recommended daily amount required for a breastfeeding 39-year-old woman. Now looking at both the 24-hour and 3-day food recalls for the subject and comparing them to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, there are some dietary recommendations which will be suggested to the participant to change her dietary intake. So one of the recommendations will be to develop a meal plan, and that'll help assist her manage her nutritional and energy requirements. These suggestions should improve her dietary intake, increase her long-term health, and enhance her ongoing life. They include increasing her intake of grains and cereals and breads to at least 2 or most meals a day. Include vegetables at least twice a day. Fruit as 2 meals or as a snack twice a day. Include a serve of milk products as a significant part of 2 meals or snacks a day. And also include a fish meal at least once a week. So looking at the recommendations to her dietary intake in a little bit more detail. So let's starting with breakfast here on the recalls. It says that she is consuming bread and she's using white bread. So she can opt out and change out to use a wholemeal or whole grain bread if she chooses to have toast. However, she can substitute that if she decides to have cereal. She can have a whole grain cereal, approximately 60 grams, and with a low-fat milk, approximately 250 mils. She can either choose that option or to have a yogurt, approximately 100 grams, according to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating 2017. Coffee. As we can see, her coffee intake is quite high. It's approximately about a litre of coffee per day, which is quite an excessive amount, so the recommendation will be for her to decrease her coffee intake. Some of the health benefits to coffee are controversial, though drinking too much coffee may have unpleasant and even dangerous side effects to the individual, Spritzer 2017. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics 2015, coffee is only classified as a discretionary food if sold with sugar. So since a participant is making her own coffee, it's not described as a discretionary food, therefore the recommendation will be that she still decreases her coffee intake. Another recommendation for Tanya is that she will need to include a morning and afternoon break into her dietary intake. This is a great way to increase her intake of nuts, milk products, vegetables, and/or fruits. So these snack breaks are a great way for her to increase her low-level consumption of these food groups and improve her current eating habits. Some of the added health benefits of including these snack breaks into her diet are increased concentration, improved metabolism, lowers her cholesterol, and also controls her blood sugars. Mercy Health, 2018. She will also need to include at least one or more fish meals per week into her diet, even though her meat intake is quite high and is above the recommended daily serves guidelines. The health benefits of eating fish are that it provides essential omega-3 fatty acids and vitamins such as D and B2 and the necessary nutrients to keep our heart and brain healthy. This is important for the subject as research has shown consumption of fish at least once a week decreases the risk of metabolic syndrome. Sydney Lap, 2022. Discretionary foods. They're usually categorized as foods which contain a high level or amount of sugar, saturated fats, salt, and are low in fiber. They're also high in kilojoules and lack essential nutrients. They're often referred to as energy-dense, nutrient-poor foods. Tanya's recommended intake of the discretionary food equates to one serve, approximately 600 kilojoules. However, she is consuming an excess of this amount. There needs to be a decrease of her sugar intake because she may be prone to diabetes according to her family history, and this can be managed by decreasing her intake of coffee, therefore decreasing some of the sugar intake for her. According to the Australian Guide of Healthy Eating, there is no recommendation to water intake, as each individual's requirements at any one time will have many variables to consider. As a universal guide, it is recommended that females who are lactating should consume at least 9 cups of water per day. Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, 2022. The subject is consuming the recommended amount of water daily for her needs, though she still will have to monitor her water intake, particularly if she is consuming cordial with that as well. This can also increase her sugar intake and widen her risk of developing diabetes. It is recommended the subject also increase her low-fat milk and dairy products or alternatives, as she is not consuming the recommended daily requirement for a lactating female. It is important that she does this, as they are an excellent source of protein, calcium, and packed with essential nutrients and minerals. Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, 2022. Additionally, it is more important and an element of maintaining strong, healthy bones. Another key recommendation for the subject is to include some physical activity into her lifestyle. As the subject does not participate in any physical activity, it is recommended that she includes walking for up to 30 minutes or more per day. According to the Victorian Department of Health, 2015, it is a great activity to maintain or improve your overall health. Walking is a low-impact exercise which requires minimal equipment. It's free, can be done at your own pace and any time of the day. This type of low-impact exercise can reduce the risk of developing diabetes, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and even some cancers. Victorian Department of Health, 2015. This recommendation for the subject to participate in the physical activity is important as her family history indicates she is at risk of developing any of the named conditions. It is also recommended that the subject has a medical assessment by a doctor before she begins any physical activity, particularly if she is overweight, has not exercised in a long time, and is approximately 40 years of age. Body mass index. Body mass index is used to determine if you are in a healthy weight range for your height. Heart Foundation, 2022. The subject's anthropometric measurements of height and weight in relation to the Australian standards for body mass index by the Heart Foundation calculator indicates she is 150 centimetres tall, 104 kilograms. The calculation has indicated that she is 42.2 and has fallen into the category which is classed as obese. Some of the subject recommendations for the subject are to lose weight, eat a well-balanced healthy diet, include regular daily exercise, and seek advice from a doctor or a dietary practitioner for support. The Heart Foundation's measurements on waist also indicate the same for women who are over 80 centimetres, 31.5 inches on their waist measurements, they are also putting their health at risk. The subject's waist measurements are 138 centimetres, which is 54 inches, which indicates she is also at risk of heart disease and stroke. The advice is the same as the BMI relating to the subject, that she lose weight, improve her diet, include regular exercise, and also seek practitioner support where needed. So in closing, for the 3-day and 24-hour food recalls of the assessment, food, unless we actually know and record what and when we are eating, we don't really know how our dietary intake can impact our short and long-term health. The Australian Guide to Healthy Eating provides guidelines and recommendations of consuming a mix of the 5 food groups to supply our body with the necessary nutrients, and gives suggestions of portion sizes in order to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Most people are unaware of the future health risks their current diet is responsible for, and will continue to consume foods and discretionary foods above and below the recommendations of the guidelines, therefore increasing the risk of developing metabolic syndromes now and later in life. While there are challenges using both food recalls as assessment tools, the obvious health benefits is that it highlights quite clearly the subject's deficiencies in their own dietary intake, identifies health risks, and makes recommendations for change. Coupled with the body mass indicator, calculator, and waist measurements, this gives strength to the assessments for the subject to make changes to their dietary intake and lifestyle for their long-term health. However, the subject will choose to make any recommended changes to their diet and adhere to them for future health management. For people who identify as obese or overweight, they are at greater risk of developing chronic health conditions such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and other cancers. Maintaining a healthy body weight is vital for our current and long-term health. Embracing a positive, respectful, and supportive approach to quality healthy eating according to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, combined with physical activity appropriately, may assist people to change their current eating habits, improve their health, and reduce the risk of cardiovascular complications to their life. The information should be discussed with and provided by appropriate health professionals to the subject if they choose to make any changes to their current lifestyle. Thank you.